Good evening, and welcome to Portland Rising, the monthly news, arts, and interview program produced by the Portland Phoenix. This evening, we will be discussing what is likely the most important election in the recent history of Portland. There are many questions on the ballot, some that resulted from the year-long effort of an elected charter commission, and some that are citizen initiatives, including a raise in the minimum wage. This is a ballot that is important. But tonight, we're going to focus on two of the Charter Commission questions that would reshape the structure of city government. Put simply, the voters will decide whether to change the city's form of government from one where a city manager is vested with a strong administrative authority, hired by and subject to the policy decisions of the council, to one proposed by the Charter Commission, where a popularly elected mayor, directly responsible to the wishes of the voters, would have greater administrative authority. We're going to go into the details of this plan tonight, as well as another ballot item that would give the elected school board direct authority over the budget, subject to a vote of the residents of Portland. These recommendations emerged from the Charter Commission, which was elected last year for the specific purpose of recommending potential changes to the structure of Portland city government. There are other items on the November 8th ballot from the commission, including a proposal to strengthen the city's police citizen review board and to create a clean elections program for city candidates. All these questions, including a slate of initiated referendum questions, make for a challenging voter experience this year. Joining me to discuss these items tonight are Emily Figdor, who is the current school board chair and leader of Yes for Schools, which backs the referendum to give more power to the school board. Michael Brennan, who is a current legislator and former Portland mayor who's had extensive experience with school budgets in his role as mayor and who now chairs the legislature's education committee. And Pat Washburn, a member of the commission who worked for a year to develop these changes, and Tom Allen, a former city councilor, mayor, and congressman who is leading a group, Protect Portland's Future, which opposes the two questions 2 and 5, which we're discussing tonight. Pat, let's start with you. From your long work on the Charter Commission, why do you think the strong mayor proposal that's coming forward would be a good change for the city of Portland?
What we saw was that we have a system where someone who is not accountable to the voters is making a great many decisions that affect our lives. And we wanted to create a system with checks and balances where decision-making power ultimately rests in the hands of someone who is responsive to and responsible to the voters being the true center of power in any small d democratic system.
So doesn't this put, that sounds good, but this puts there are two jobs of a mayor. I mean, you would have a political figure elected and put him in the center of the administrative duties of choosing department heads, firing department heads. Is it bad to combine those?
Actually, no. The city day-to-day operations would still be overseen by a hired administrator, somebody with expertise in this area. That person would report to the mayor and would be hired by the mayor with city council input. So there are checks and balances on that power, and ultimate decision-making power still rests with the mayor.
But the city manager and the administrator really work together. The mayor and the city manager would work together to be making the decisions on department heads subject to city council approval.
Absolutely. So that there is a maximum amount of input from people who are elected, who are responsible to the voters, who are mandated to go before the voters and defend their decisions if they want to be reelected.
Tom, what's your reaction to this system, and what do you see as maybe a problem with this potential setup?
Well, quite a few problems, actually, but let me begin with the big one. For 100 years, we've had a council-manager form of government where the prime policy-making body is the city council, and the city council is directly elected by the voters of the city of Portland. The new proposal suggests, okay, we're going to weaken the council and we're going to move power to the mayor. And so the mayor would be the person who not only proposes the budget, which the city manager does now. He proposes the budget. He will determine the budget, partly because he'll be the person who chooses the city administrator. And therefore, power gets moved from the city council to the mayor. And what I think happens as a result is that, I should also say, by expanding the council to 12 instead of 9, not only have a problem with deadlocked votes, but you also have a case where it's not clear what's left for the city council, because they'll be reacting much more and needing to curry favor with the elected mayor. And so I think that instead of having the kind of collaboration you have now, that you have to have on the city council to get anything done, and that you have to have between the council and the administration, that is the city manager and the department heads, instead of that sort of enforced collaboration, what you get is more of a top-down directed system where the mayor, the elected mayor, would choose the city administrator. He would choose, with the administrator that he chooses, they would pick the department heads. He could fire the city administrator. He could get rid of the department heads, and he would propose the budget. So under this proposal, the elected mayor would gather in his or her hands the fiscal power, the administrative power, the policy power that now is spread around. And the bottom line, I think, listening to one of the experts who testified before the Charter Commission, one thing you get with an elected mayor for sure is you get a lot more conflict in the public, a lot more battles between groups that are trying to get the mayor's attention and favor and those who are objecting to what he or she is doing. So I think that the system we have now, which is the most common system for cities of our size across the country, is one that served us well for 100 years, and I think should continue. I think question 2 should be voted down.
It sometimes seems like, looking at the recent history of city managers and mayors, it sometimes feels, when we talk to a lot of business people with my work at the Phoenix, that the city government right now in its present structure is kind of an inscrutable and impenetrable bureaucracy that kind of works on its own, and at present and maybe in the past is kind of leaderless, and it's not really responsive to voters and elected people. To voters and, as I said, business people who try to get licensed. They're dealing with this big bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't an elected mayor maybe have some accountability for some of those problems?
Well, I don't think an elected mayor would solve those problems at all. I mean, I think you really have a choice between two systems, and the elected, no one person can fix all those problems. I mean, what Mayor Snyder said the other night is, I think, really true. We're living in a time of real conflict and dissension in the city of Portland, but that's not necessarily, part of that's due to outside forces, and part of it's due to, let's just say, a difficult experience with the last mayor and not Mayor Snyder, but the last one and John Jennings, who was the city manager. That a lot of controversy boiled over then in what I think was an unproductive way.
Pat, did you have a comment on that?
I think that there would be just as much conflict if question 2 is passed than as there is now. It's just that it would be taking place in public so the voters could see who was making the decisions and judge them accordingly. The council is not going to have to curry favor with the mayor. In fact, it has the power to initiate a recall election or by a supermajority simply to fire the mayor. The expansion of the council will mean that individual neighborhoods and communities will have more of a chance to have their needs heard in City Hall.
And Marian, if I could say,
Sure.
What Pat just described is a huge mistake and exactly the wrong direction, for the council to be going. To give the power to the council to recall the mayor, you invite a constant discussion from city councilors as to whether or not the mayor is doing something that should be recalled.
So does the mayor have too much power or too little power in the system? Make up your minds.
Well,
Let's listen to.
Well,
Thanks,
sorry.
Mike. Yeah.
Well, what I was gonna say is I appreciate the work of the Charter Commission and the discussions we had. I've met with the Charter Commission on a number of different occasions and offered my opinion. The system we currently have is not perfect. I don't know of a municipality across the state that does have a perfect system, but and I am familiar with the Westbrook, form of government. To take that model and superimpose it in Portland just doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't work. The other thing that I think is just highly problematic is we start talking about decision-making, accountability, and making city government more responsive, but you're going to remove the mayor from the city council. So rather than the mayor having to collaborate with the city council and to come to some agreement on where they think things should move forward, you've removed the mayor from that process. You're establishing a president of the council and vice chair. That's an immediate recipe for conflict. To say that the president of the council, either the president of the council is going to have to abdicate their responsibility to the mayor and say, okay, mayor, whatever you want for policy, we'll move that forward, or you're going to have a lot of conflict between the council and between the mayor. The other thing I just think is highly problematic is that the city manager working for the mayor means that councilors, as Tom has already pointed out, become they're no longer a necessary part of the process. The city manager is then spending the overwhelming majority of their time working with the mayor and disregarding the council. So I would ask the question again of Pat and of others, what is then the role of the council if the city manager is going to be working that closely with whoever is elected as mayor?
Right. Thank you, Mac. Emily, did you want to?
I wanted to point out one really big challenge right now in our current system, which is that the city manager holds is unaccountable to the public, but also holds all the purse strings and holds all of the decision making around staff priorities and times and policies. So what it sets up is that the counselors, rather than being the one to try to hold the city manager to the council's priorities, the counselors have to seek favor with the city manager because he or she is the one who holds all the cards. So it's setting up the city manager just to have so much power. And again, the city manager isn't accountable to the voters. So it's the system right now with no accountability. I also just wanted to mention how Mayor Snyder talked about dissension and conflict in our community. I would say, though, that dissension and conflict is because people have tremendous needs right now that are not being met. We have a housing affordability crisis. We have so many unhoused people. Our city is becoming less and less affordable to live in. We have tremendous problems, and those needs are not being met by our current city government structure. So I say, there's always going to be push and pull between different government officials, different city officials, staff, and elected officials. That's the nature of politics. But let's actually create a structure that can meet citizens' needs, that can actually solve make more progress in solving the affordable housing crisis, can deal with can put solutions forward that actually address the homelessness crisis in our community and address our the other very large unmet needs in our community.
Isn't that true, Tom? We have some, the city has some problems that have not done well.
Yeah, we've always had substantial problems. And the problems that we face as a community now are the same problems we face as a state and a nation in many ways. Because Portland isn't unique in the difficulty of trying to figure out what are we going to do with all these people who don't have the capability to find shelter, to find food, to be trained for jobs. That's a huge problem for us. But coming back to one earlier point, the city council can get rid of the city manager today. They have the ultimate power over the city manager. Those issues that we're dealing with are not going to be solved by having one person having power in the city concentrated in the mayor. They're not going to be solved that way.
And what I'd say, Emily gave a very one-dimensional description of the city manager and the city council. When the city manager develops a budget, he or she goes directly to every city councilor and says, what's occurring in your district? What's occurring in the city? What are the needs that we need to have in the budget that reflect those needs and reflect those concerns? And I can't tell you how many different times when I was mayor that the city manager would be saying, I'm talking to this councilor about this, we're trying to do this, and we're trying to put the budget together accordingly. So it's not this unilateral decisions that are made by the city manager about what occurs in the budget or what occurs in city operations. When I was mayor, we had 4 city managers. I never felt that the city manager was running the city in a way that was not responsive to the council, responsive to the issues that I raised. Now, Emily and Tom just pointed out, we have a number of problems in the city of Portland. And I'm not going to say whether or not I was a strong mayor or a weak mayor or a good mayor or a bad mayor because I wasn't reelected. But while I was mayor, we got an award from Avesta Housing for the development of affordable housing in the city of Portland, the progress we'd made. We're the first city in the state of Maine to pass a minimum wage. We got $22 million to rebuild Hall School. We got millions of dollars in bond issues to allow IMSCIP to have international trade opportunities through rail. So those were things that occurred under the current system, and we were able to address a number of key issues in the city. I don't think that what's being proposed at this particular point that we're going to automatically end homelessness in the city of Portland with this new approach. I don't think that we're automatically going to address some of the other issues that are facing the city because of this approach. And what I would say again, this structure, taking what we have in the city of Westbrook and imposing that in the city of Portland, I think it's going to be very problematic going forward.
Michael, you've got to admit that the previous city manager, Mr. Jennings, accrued a lot of power and, got a lot of controversy, couldn't get along with the mayor at that time, not saying that was a difficult situation on both sides. And really the city didn't make progress during that time?
What I would say that the current system, it does rely on the city manager and the mayor having a good working relationship. When that doesn't occur, we did see what happens as a result of that. So then the question is, did that invest, because they didn't have that good relationship, invest more power in the city manager or more power in the mayor? And the city manager had significant support amongst the councilors. And as Tom pointed out, the council at any time can relieve the city manager of their duties. But because there was such strong support in the council for the city manager, he retained that position.
Pat, do you have any thoughts on
think
this?
With all respect for the gentleman beside me and the work that they have done, I think what they're missing is that there is a deep frustration among Portland voters who elected a slate of progressives to the Charter Commission, who want change, who want more of a voice. And the current system does not let them have it. The example that we often use is the decision to move the food trucks on the Eastern Prom. That was a situation that had a lot of constituents in it. You had the neighbors, you had the food truck owners who are businesses, you had the need to protect a valuable city park, and you had the city's tourism industry, which loves having food available at this place. So I'm not going to say whether the city manager made the right decision among all the conflicts in that case, because that doesn't matter. What matters is that that decision was made without input from the people.
Well, that was certainly a big decision.
Absolutely.
Right.
And has hurt small businesses in our community because they haven't had an ample voice, because decisions are made behind closed doors.
And because organizations which have deep coffers can fund the opponents of change. And we are seeing that in this election to a very large extent. I don't think that Uber and DoorDash really care about the Peaks Island Council or the Native American land acknowledgement, but they are encouraging everybody to vote no all down the ballot because they think Portland voters aren't smart enough to evaluate the questions for themselves.
Right. It's certainly true. There's a stunning amount of money, over $400,000, that come into Enough is Enough, which rejects all referendums.
No on everything is a 2-year-old's response, right? You're a parent.
Well, let me say this. That money is going to the citizen initiated referenda, not to, as far as I know, not to.
Yes, it is. It's all of them.
All of them.
Yep. They want you to vote no all down the ballot.
Okay, but anyway.
They're running an ad, they're running countless ads on social media. The ad that they're featuring right now is all about questions 2 and 5. So the charter questions.
Yep.
But there's always money in elections. But one of the issues I find challenging, and we're going to sort of move on, but the role of the city council, as Tom was alluding to before, is certainly a change. And some things that it does seem perhaps that their role is diminished. The mayor has veto power over the budget, which could be difficult to override. Overrides can be difficult. Is this the balance of the right balance of power? And one really minor thing, it has the council, it gives the council with the review committee that is established, the personnel review committee, the ability to kind of work with the city administrator, get involved in the day-to-day running of the departments. And is that a good thing? I'm not sure the council as a policy body should be going in and asking questions of the police department or
what the charter revisions do is they ask the city council and the mayor and the city administrator to come up with a communication policy that everybody will follow. We understand that it's not cool if a city councilor is bugging department heads 45 times a day. That's not, they got to get their work done. But we also understand that it's not cool if a city councilor is trying to make policy, trying to do their job, and can't get information about what's happening in the departments that the city oversees.
If I could just add, as I recall, and Pat, you'll remember this better than I do, but watching the proceedings of the Charter Commission, the Governance Committee, I believe, tried to deal with that communication problem because there clearly was, well, let's just say, cases in the past where city councilors had been bugging city staff in a way that they should not. On the other hand, there's a legitimate need for city councilors to get information from different departments and different city staff. And I thought that the Governance Committee came up with a proposal to deal with that.
That is the proposal, and it was actually the Procedures Committee, which I chaired.
Okay, but
What we did was we told the city council and the mayor to come up with a policy that everybody could follow. We didn't tell them what it should be.
But in the meantime, you just went full speed ahead with an all-powerful mayor, right? That's what you did.
not all powerful. Absolutely, there are checks and balances on this mayor. There are 4 ways that the mayor can be removed from office, which is 3 more ways than we have now.
But only one of them's real. The re-election is real.
Right.
Well, that one was already there.
Yeah, right. That's my point.
I think they're all real.
Any final notes on this? We're going to move on shortly to our other
I
issue.
just want to, reflect a little bit more on what Pat and Emily had said about, the difficult issues that are facing the city. I think there is some agreement that trying to solve them through referendum is not necessarily the best approach. And we've already seen what happens when you have referendums that come forward, and then because they haven't been fully vetted, because they haven't been discussed, because all the different implications have not been put on the table, you end up having even people that sponsor referendums walk away from it and say, oh, we made a mistake. Other issues we've seen about the Airbnb and Peaks Island that was not, fully discussed. So, I support, I want to see a city government that is able to take on important policy issues, but have them vetted in a way that allow us to have policy solutions and policy directions that make sense, not that are making arbitrary decisions about what should be ordinance or what should be the policy in the city.
Emily?
I'll just say that the reason why we're seeing so many citizen-initiated referendum is because our current city government is not responsive to the needs of Portland voters.
Exactly.
And so
it's that deep frustration that I was just discussing.
The current system isn't working. We need a more responsive, more small d democratic system.
Okay. Well, thank you. This is good discussion. The second big item we've got tonight is the proposal to have the school board be totally responsible for its budget, except for, it has to be approved by state statute, although I think there may be a change by the voters. So, but it would not be a significant city council approval process in that budget. Emily, can you explain how you think this would work and why you think that's a good plan?
Absolutely. So question 5 empowers the school board and the voters to set the school budget every year. And this is how it's done in 94% of communities in Maine and in communities all across the country. So it's the school board that governs everything having to do with public education in our city. The council has no role whatsoever other than the power that the charter gives the council to set the school budget right now. So what that means is that city councilors don't have any view into the day-to-day operations of the school district, the strengths, priorities, programs, needs. That's the work of the school board. And, some people call us, we'll say that call the school, the school board, the school committee, or the school department. And in fact, those are wrong. Our authority comes directly from the state. And again, we're solely responsible for public education in the city. And yet we don't have the basic authority to set our own budget. Always with voter approval. Instead, that's the city council's job under the current charter. So it creates a lot of problems. And the biggest is that we on the school board and with the superintendent have to essentially plead every year for the resources to run our schools and to meet our kids' needs. And we've seen right now we have huge disparities in our schools, disparities between kids who are English language learners, kids who are students of color, kids with disabilities, and largely white students. So there are huge opportunity and achievement gaps. And the current process does not give us the tools we need to actually address those gaps. I can give you an example of this year. The city council's finance committee directed us to cut $1 million from our budget. And we looked really hard at what that would mean and ultimately came back to the city council and said, we can't make those cuts. And the city council relented and approved our budget. but we can't count on that always happening. It's very hard to go back to the city council and say, no, we're not going to do what you told us to do. So question 5 is sets us on a much stronger footing for the future in terms of actually getting the resources that our students need and that our schools need. And to make it a process that is more accountable, because right now the school budget is like a hot potato between the city council and the school board. And so for voters, they don't really know who's accountable. With this, the school board would be fully accountable to families and taxpayers, the full community, for our budget. Also, the current process right now is very hard for members of the community to have their voices heard because the process is so long and has so many different steps that if you want to be heard as a community member, do you come to the school board's finance committee meetings, or do you come to the joint meetings of the school board and city's finance meetings, or do you go to the city's council finance committee meetings, or do you go to the full school board meetings or the full city council meetings? It's pretty impossible as a community member to have your voice heard. And so this change where the school board sets the budget and proposes it to the voters for final approval makes that process way more accessible for citizen involvement.
Does the school board have an open process as it goes on to invite public comment at special meetings?
Absolutely. And so does the council currently. It's just that there are so many steps along the way that it's very hard for voters to have their voices heard.
Emily, you've been on the school board 4 years? 2 years?
Yes,
4 years.
4 years.
And
I'll just say that I've been involved in the last 8 school budgets because I was involved as a parent and community member beforehand.
Right.
And then have been on the finance committee when I joined the school board and now as chair.
So I'm wondering, was each budget process between school and council a challenge, or did it work well sometimes, or was it always difficult?
It is always very fraught. As a member of the school board, it is very fraught because you're going in and asking a different body that has no expertise on what you're doing to actually listen and take in what you're saying about the needs and priorities and to respond. Unfortunately, our work is often just assigned a dollar value without the understanding. And, in some ways for city councilors, it's very hard. I mean, they have a lot of other work to fully understand the work of the schools and the needs of the schools. It's a huge task to take on. So the system will be better structured and more responsive to the needs of our students and schools if it's the school board setting that budget, proposing it to voters to approve.
Michael, you have, as a mayor and in the legislature, have a great deal of experience with school budgets. What's your take on how this can work, should work, has
I
worked?
have had the opportunity not only to work on city budget, but also on state budgets. And I think the very first question that needs to be asked that Emily didn't quite satisfy in terms of an answer is, what is the problem we're trying to address? And if you look at resources in terms of being available to the schools, that has not been an issue. The city council has supported school budgets. The vote that has been taken has supported school budgets. And the school committee has not been lacking in terms of resources in order to achieve the goals that they have articulated. And there have been increases each year. In addition to that, during the pandemic, there was almost $35 billion of federal money that came to the Portland school system as well. And because we've gotten to 55% state funding, the city got a significant increase in state funding. So if the issue or the argument is that the city voters and or the city council have denied the resources necessary to the city council, there's not much evidence to support that. The second major issue for me is that you cannot take something the size of the school committee budget and the impact it has on the property tax and put that together in a vacuum. It's not a silo exercise. We need to also be looking at public safety issues, parks issues, how do we address homelessness? and how do we address a host of other issues in the city of Portland. And so putting together that budget is a balancing of all those competing needs and all those competing priorities. And you can't do that if all of a sudden you're going to take half the mill rate and half the city budget and put it over here and say, this is only going to be decided by the school committee. And I think at some point, 70 to 80% of people in the city of Portland do not have somebody in their schools. If at some point voters say, we're really much more concerned about fire, police protection, and parks, that then puts this process at a disadvantage. And we've seen this in other communities around the state, where you end up having these fierce debates between education funding and people that want to reduce property taxes or put resources to other places. But the last issue that Emily didn't touch on, and the superintendent, who's been outspoken in support of question 5, has not touched on, is that the legal implications of this are far-reaching and are not conclusive at all. And in fact, the attorney for the Charter Commission would not certify this issue because he questioned the legality of it. The school committee then went to their attorney, Drummond and Woodson, said, write us an opinion that will then allow us to put this on the ballot. And even their opinion, which I have read, questions whether or not this is legal. If you look at the Maine Constitution, it clearly says towns/municipalities are responsible for public education. Emily correctly pointed out that school committees are creations of the state and state statute. If there are issues that about the school committee in terms of their operation, what they're doing, they need to come to the state and put proposals on the table, which we haven't seen any at this point. Also, I just would ask Emily at some point, she keeps referring to 94% of decision-making in the state around education is done by what's being proposed. I haven't been able to verify that 94% or understand how they arrived at 94%, because every other municipality in the state that has a charter has the decision-making process that we currently have in Portland. If question 5 were to pass, we would become the first and only municipality with a charter that would allow the school committee to have that decision-making process. And unfortunately, we'd end up in a situation of having the city and or taxpayers potentially sue on this issue. And there isn't a whole lot of dispute about that in terms of the eventuality of what this would look like in terms of ending up in court.
Emily.
Okay, so that's a lot to respond to. I want to start with the idea that 70% or a large number of Portlanders don't have kids in the system, and that suggests that there's less support for public education. I think that we have seen time and again that Portland greatly values public education. Every time Portlanders go to the polls, it's not about my kids, it's about our community, it's about our city's future. Public education is a good that is absolutely essential to support and to invest in for the good of our community. So I just want to start there. In terms of the legal issues, the Charter Commission's lawyer also didn't sign off on the clean elections proposal. Drummond Woodsum, who represents the school district, and is actually the preeminent education law firm in the state. They helped develop question 5. And the basic framework is that we have broad home rule authority. And so what we're proposing in question 5, which is aligning Portland with how the whole rest of the state considers school budgets, with the elected school board coming up with a budget and proposing it to voters to approve. That is the norm in the rest of the state. So it's aligning us to all of the communities who do it that way. It is the fact that we would. There are just 31 charter communities that are individual school districts in the state, that have the process we have right now, where there's another municipal body that weighs in. And we would be the first of those 31 charter communities that are individual school districts. Just because no one has done it before doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We're looking for a system that is more democratic and supports public education in a better way. Right now, we have to work tooth and nail to get the resources that our kids need. And most years the council is telling the school board that we have to cut X amount from our budget. It would be a better process for the elected officials whose job it is to run the schools to actually be the ones who are proposing to voters who ultimately get to decide what the school budget should be.
So, Emily, are you saying we would be the first of
we would be the first of the 30? We would be the first of the 31 charter
that's
communities.
Bangor, Lewiston, but all the major municipalities and cities in Portland have the current process that we're using. So when Emily says 94%, she's talking about RSUs, SADs that are governed by other state statute. So it's very misleading to say 94% of school districts across the state or education funding is decided by that, when municipalities like Portland, South Portland, Westbrook, and whatever use the process that we currently have.
Okay, I want to. Pat, Tom, Pat, would you like to?
I don't have kids, and I'm 57, so I think we can say that ship has sailed. I care deeply about the schools, and I want decisions about the schools to be made by people with the best knowledge possible. It is absolutely important for the school system to be a good steward of the taxpayer dollars it is given, then this system would put the onus on the voters to elect people to the school board who are good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. Right now, we can elect anybody we want and they'll be overridden. So this makes the lines of responsibility more clear.
Tom,
if I could just clear up one thing very quickly. Almost everybody, when you look at the city council, there's almost always at least 2 or 3 members of the school committee, former school committee members, that are on the city council. So to say that the city council...
But the needs of the school district change. It's not that once you've been on the school board, you understand the current needs of the school district. So that's the thing. Just because you served at one point on the school board doesn't give you any insight into the current challenges and needs. I mean, it's always evolving. The needs of our students are changing and evolving. And so, this is the common sense way to go forward, where we're structuring our local government in a way that better supports public education.
Michael, did you?
Well, again, I just want to stress the fact that this is a collaborative effort between the state, between the city, and the school committee. Just an example, this past session, we made 3 changes to the school funding formula that directly impacted Portland in a positive way. But the superintendent did not know about one of them. I had called him and I said, we're making this change, it's going to do this. I had to email him a copy of the state budget that pointed out what it was. He had not included that in the budget that they had prepared going forward. And I'm not criticizing him for not knowing. There's a lot of things we do at the state level that not everybody knows. But that's why you want to have a collaborative discussion between state legislators, between city councilors and school committees when you're putting these type of budgets together. And to start to silo and put things in vacuum and say, we're just going to put this over here and pay attention to it. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Doesn't question 5 contemplate the school, the council and the school board coming together?
It's totally voluntary.
No, well, in question 2, there is question 2 would create a joint budget committee of 4 city councilors and 4 school board members that would come together every year and make recommendations that based on the priorities for the city and the priorities for the school district, as well as constraints. For me, as someone who's only served on the school board, I would so welcome that opportunity, because right now it's just a one-way conversation with the city council telling the school board what to do. This creates a true collaborative process where we're talking about and able to weigh the priorities of both the school district and the city. it will enable us as city officials to make decisions that are better for the city as a whole.
Tom.
Yeah, just two quick points. One of them is I do have a problem with the number that 90%, 70% of places in Maine, communities in Maine do it this way. Most of Maine is covered by school administrative districts, so there isn't a corresponding. If you've got 3 towns, you can't go to all 3 separately. They are separate, and so we would be the first of the 31, as Emily admitted. But also, Emily said earlier that in the last round, I think you said the city staff asked you to cut $1 million, and you resisted, and they backed down. I mean, coming back to Mike's initial question, what is the problem here, really? What's the problem that would lead to this kind of fundamental change with, frankly, a whole lot of legal complexities that we've just touched on?
Emily, I think a lot of taxpayers would say the schools have had pretty good funding, good funding support in the last 5-10 years. Is that not the case?
They have in the last 5 years. In part, we've had, I want to acknowledge Representative Brennan's huge role at the state level in helping to secure funding that helps Portland, and then state funding for education overall. And in Governor Mills finally honoring voters' decision to fund statewide 55% of public education. In Portland, it's a much smaller percent. It's about 15-17% of our funding comes from the state. The rest, and that's because we have such high property values in Portland. Just at a very simple level, I'll put it that way. So it's a challenging situation for us because our school district has intense needs. We have intense poverty in our school district. And yet, because there's such high property values, we get a relatively small portion of our budget comes from the state. It's a challenge. It's a challenge I know that I'll work with Representative Brennan on in the future. But to answer your larger question, it shouldn't be so hard for the school district to get the resources it needs. The last 5 years, in part because of COVID funding and in part because we've just been willing to fight really hard, we've been okay. That hasn't been the case in the past. And I do think if you look at the disparities that we have in our district, the fact that those exist in the way they do is in part because we have underfunded education.
I just want to make 2 quick points. One is that the committee that Emily described is voluntary. Their recommendations, their review, and their discussions are just recommendations. They have no authority. And I think everybody does understand that the city council now cannot do line item veto of educational funding. It just approves an overall amount in the process. But the other thing is, I just have to say, Marian, it's very discouraging to me, having been involved in a number of aspects of Portland government and state government, to have a charter commission put an issue on the ballot that has this many legal questions to it, to ask voters to go out and vote on something that will cause a collision between the city council and the school committee when you have competing legal opinions, and the only opinion you have that supports what you're doing is the law firm that you have hired to represent you. I think Portland voters have to pause and say, this is not a good idea.
The school board also
actually had lawyers on it.
The school board also paid Drummond Woodsum to advocate for this, did they not?
Not to advocate, to do the research.
To write the opinion.
To do the research to understand what our options are for a better system that better supports public education. And in terms of, we are on solid legal ground, very solid legal ground. And the idea that that someone's going to, would sue the city over the system of government that Portland voters decide to that they want to see put in place, I do not see that happening. But we're on very solid legal ground, and it's just the same with question 3, where again, the Charter Commission's lawyer didn't want to sign off on that. We shouldn't allow one legal opinion to stop us from putting in place a better system of government to support public education.
It is the case that lawyers disagree.
Well, I just say, Marian, I've been on the Education Committee 12 years in Augusta. I've chaired it for 4 years. And we've had any number of discussions about budgeting process and who can do what and what it looks like in terms of school committees. And it's very clear to me why the attorney for the city did not sign off on this, because he recognized the fact that the Maine Constitution says here's who's responsible for financing and making available public education in the state of Maine, and that if the type of changes that Emily is talking about were necessary or to be discussed, they need to be discussed at the state level through state statute, not by amending a charter at the local level.
Okay, I think we've covered that pretty well. Emily, you've done a good job taking a lot of questions, but it is true there is an outstanding legal question. It would seem that may have to get resolved in the future.
It's highly unlikely. Again, we're on solid legal footing, and I think the most important thing is that we're cognizant of the fact that right now we have a system of government that makes it very hard to prioritize public education. I mean, we saw it with another issue that the representative and I disagreed on around school renovation, where the city council is the gatekeeper. And so for nearly a quarter of a century, Portland didn't invest in make any major investment in its school buildings. And we had to, because the city council was a gatekeeper, efforts by the school board to actually pass bonds to renovate our rundown elementary schools never got to the voters, because it was always the city council that stopped it. It's the same issue with the school budget, that we're having to fight so hard, and ultimately we should structure our government in a way that better prioritizes our kids in public education.
I got to say, Mary, I'm surprised that Emily would bring that up, because in fact the state fully funded East End School, Ocean Avenue School, and the now Rose School, and we waited 6 more months and continued to participate in the state process. There's city documentation showing that at least 2, if not 3 of the schools would have gotten fully funded by the state. And it was because there were a lot of people in the school committee and other places that misled Portland voters about what the potential of getting state funding would be, that we now have $64 million of bond issues that the school committee just took money that they got from the state to put in a reserve account to pay for the debt service on those bond issues. So I wouldn't point to that as good fiscal management or good planning and decision making, and I certainly wouldn't point to that and say this is an example of the city council standing in the way of educational needs within the city of Portland, because it's just not true.
Pat?
This is an example of the frustration that we've been talking about. Voters took this to a referendum because they weren't being heard.
Absolutely. And the fact is that the state program has funded a handful, maybe 5 schools since we passed the bond in 2017, statewide. So the idea that we would have multiple of our schools funded, because that program is for the schools that are in the very worst condition in the entire state. And it's a local responsibility to renovate and construct schools. So we shouldn't push off our local responsibility as the voters decided. And we should actually invest in public education. And so it is a very similar issue. And the opportunity we have with question 5 is to create a better system of government to support public education in Portland.
I'm going to step back for a minute, but staying on the schools. Portland is at a turning point with the schools. We've got a new superintendent that will be coming in after this school year. Emily, how do you assess where the where the schools are going, what they need? What would you like to see happen? Let's step back and see what, as someone who is very involved, where do you see it going? And besides this money question and control question, how would you like to see the schools improve and residents be involved in what happens with the schools?
We have a lot of work to do because, as I mentioned, there are big disparities among our students, where we're seeing English language learners, students of color, students with disabilities really struggling, whereas our more advantaged and largely white students are doing very well. And we need to address the needs of the kids who are not being met in the current system. We've done a lot of work to start to kind of turn the ship. Superintendent Batana has been incredibly visionary, building the Portland Promise, which is our strategic plan when he first came in now 6 years ago, to really lay out where we need to go as a district. We've changed a lot of policies on the school board, such as around discipline and things of that sort, to start to change culture, to dismantle systems that essentially to address systemic racism. But we have changing culture and really addressing needs that have historically been unmet, take time and are hard.
Okay. Well, we are actually, believe it or not, coming to the end of this exercise.
Do we have time to
As
make one
Michael
point?
predicted, it flew by. So just really briefly, because we're really going to get out of time. Is there anything else? We just really have very quickly.
If I could just add one thing, and I appreciate and agree with what Emily said about direction, but one of the biggest challenges, if not the biggest single challenge facing the Portland school system, is Portland and Deering High School and career and technical ed. And we're going to have to look to consolidate those buildings. That could be a $150 to $200 million project in the city.
Okay. We're wrapping up. I want to thank you very much. For being with us today, Emily, Michael, Pat, Tom. I think this is a great discussion. I want to remind everybody to vote on November 8th. Absentee ballots are available now, and you can vote in person absentee at City Hall during working hours at the State of Maine room until November 3rd. Thank you again to my guests, and please tune in next month for another edition of Portland Rising.